Hello again. Hope you're doing well. We're going to talk about chemical bonds today. So this is all about chemical reactions. So when you have iron and you leave it outside in the rain, it turns into rust color. So it changes from that sulfur color we talked about before, metal-looking color, metallic, and it turns into this iron rust color. So anytime you see a chemical change, you can see a color change. So color changes are a really good clue that we have a chemical change. And we're going to see how chemical changes are different from physical changes. So this is a really good thing to remember. I usually put chemical physical changes quizzes and tests. So this is a good thing to remember. So what happens during a chemical change? Let's look. So the ability of a substance to undergo a specific chemical change is called a chemical property. So that doesn't make a lot of sense. It just means that if something can have a chemical reaction, and lots of times you'll see a color change, then that's a chemical property, its ability to react with something. So iron has the ability to react with oxygen in the air to turn into rust. So chemical properties can be used to identify a substance, but chemical properties can be observed only when a substance undergoes a chemical change. So you can't just look at raw iron and say, oh, it could react with oxygen. You have to actually do the chemistry. You have to do the chemical reaction to see if it's a chemical change. During a chemical change, the composition of matter always changes. So we always have a combination or a breaking up of elements that are hooked up together in a chemical change. So remember, during a physical change, the composition of matter never changes, but chemical change, it always has a change in the composition. So that's the difference between the two. So here's showing a magnet separating iron from sulfur. This is a physical change. Anytime you move one thing away from something else, like when we talked about filtration and distillation, you're physically moving, separating things from each other. That's a physical change. If you cut your hair, that's a physical change. You're separating the hair from each other. So that's a physical change. When you have a mixture of iron and sulfur and you heat it up, it turns into something new called iron sulfide, and that's a chemical change. You've made something new, and the color generally changes. So chemical change is also called a chemical reaction. So we're going to use chemical reactions all the way through this whole class. One or more substances change into one or more new substances during a chemical reaction. The thing that you start with is called the reactant. So this is a really important word. I need you guys to know this one for sure. Reactants are written down first on the paper on the left side of a chemical reaction. And then the thing that you make is called a product. So that goes on the right side of the chemical reaction. So I need you guys to know reactant is the beginning, product is the end, beginning and end, left and right when we write a chemical reaction. Very, very important. So how do you know if you had a chemical change? I already talked about one as a color change. So here's the clues. If you see, if you feel heat or your substance gets colder, or if you see an explosion or you see light, that's a transfer of energy. So that's a chemical change. You've got a chemical change going on. If you have a change in color, we talked about that. So the metal turning into an orangey color, that's a chemical change. If you see a gas, if you see little bubbles in your test tube, or bigger bubbles or foaming, that's making a gas, that's a chemical change. And if you make a solid when you're done, when you put two things together and you see a little, your test tube gets cloudy, or you see pieces of something falling to the bottom, that's a precipitate. So that's a chemical change, chemical reaction. So those are the 4 clues, and those are important. So precipitate is a solid that forms and settles out of the liquid, and that's a chemical reaction. So we use these chemical changes in all kinds of ways. like they're showing how to figure out what pH is. So that's a color change, and you might have done this in your pool, or you might have done it in a lab before, where you have to see the pH number for a liquid. So this is an important law. It's usually, you'll see this on quizzes and tests, conservation of mass. So the grams that you start with, the mass that you start with at the beginning of a reaction has to equal the grams you end up with at the end of the reaction. So the mass of the reactants, the left side, has to equal the mass of the products. We can't magically have elements disappear into thin air or appear out of thin air. So the grams that we start with has to equal the grams that we end up with. That's a really important law. So during this reaction, everything has to stay equal. The beginning has to equal the mass of the ending. So mass is conserved. That's just a fancy way of saying we can't have mass appear or disappear out of thin air. So when we start the reaction, we start with 43.43 grams. When we end up after the reaction, we're still going to have 43.43 grams. Even though I see a color change from beginning to end, I know I have a chemical change, I'm not losing any mass beginning to end. That's important. So let's try a quiz, see how you do. So which of these is a chemical reaction? So we talked about it at the beginning. Let's see if you remember. So resting, remember, changes from a metal color to an orangey red color. So that's a chemical change, which is not a clue that a chemical change is taking place. What do you think? Let's see. So if we have something going from a liquid to a solid, doesn't mean we have a chemical change. A change of state is a physical change. Last question. During any chemical change, the mass of the products is, so products is the end, so what does it have to equal to? Let's see what you did. Perfect. So the beginning and the end masses have to equal each other. So it's good talking to you again. I hope you have a great day. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.